Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a second chance. Daniel Reyes thought his had already passed him by. For 3 years, he's been the man nobody notices carrying groceries for neighbors who forget his name, fixing broken things that no one thanks him for. His own daughter won't return his calls. He's learned to live quietly, expecting nothing from a world that seems to have forgotten he exists. But on this Tuesday evening at Riverside Park, a little girl with tears on her cheeks changes everything. "Can you help me find my mommy? She fell down," she whispers, slipping her small hand into his. Daniel doesn't know it yet, but saying yes will lead him into something much bigger than finding a missing mother. What happens when helping this child forces him to face the very reason his own daughter turned away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The playground at Riverside Park had seen better days, much like Daniel Reyes himself. The swings creaked with a familiar rhythm that spoke of countless childhood dreams launched into summer air, while the old oak trees stood sentinel over memories that seemed to belong to someone else's life. Daniel sat on the weathered bench where he'd come every Tuesday evening for the past 6 months, watching the world move around him like he was a ghost observing the living. At 54, Daniel carried himself with the careful posture of a man who'd learned to take up less space in the world. His calloused hands, scarred from 25 years of construction work, rested quietly on his knees as he watched a young mother push her toddler on the swing set. The sound of the child's laughter should have brought him comfort, but instead it opened a hollow ache in his chest, where his own parenting memories lived. 3 years ago, Daniel had been someone different entirely. Back then, he was the foreman who could read blueprints like poetry and guide a crew through the most complex builds with the steady confidence of a man who understood how things fit together. His yellow hard hat had been his crown, his lunch pail packed each morning by Maria before their marriage fell apart under the weight of his drinking and her exhaustion. But that man seemed like a stranger now, someone he'd known briefly and lost touch with completely. The divorce papers had been signed on a Thursday in February. Sophia, his daughter, had been 22 then, fresh from college and full of righteous anger about everything he'd put her mother through. The last real conversation they'd had was in the parking lot of the courthouse, her words sharp enough to cut glass. "You chose the bottle over us every single time, Dad. Don't expect me to choose you now." She'd been right, of course. Daniel had spent the following months drowning in the kind of self-pity that justified more drinking, until a moment of clarity came wrapped in the form of Mrs. Chen finding him passed out in his own vomit on the apartment hallway floor. The old woman, barely 5 feet tall and fierce as a storm, had hauled him to his feet and delivered a lecture in broken English that somehow cut deeper than Sophia's polished accusations. "You want to die?" she'd asked, her weathered hands surprisingly strong as they gripped his shoulders. "Then die. But don't make me watch. Don't make your neighbors step over your body every morning." That was 2.5 years ago. Since then, Daniel had been sober, one day at a time, rebuilding himself from the foundation up, like any good construction project. But unlike buildings, people didn't come with blueprints, and he'd discovered that being sober didn't automatically make him worthy of forgiveness. The stack of letters on his kitchen table served as daily reminders of his failures. 47 letters he'd written to Sophia over the past 2 years, each one carefully crafted with words he hoped might bridge the canyon between them. 47 letters returned unopened, her forwarding address apparently changed again. His daughter had become a master at staying just out of reach, close enough that he could track her general location through social media posts she forgot to make private, but far enough away that his attempts at contact bounced back like stones thrown at bulletproof glass. Now Daniel spent his days doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, his construction skills reduced to fixing leaky faucets and painting fences for elderly homeowners who paid him in cash and occasional conversation. Mrs. Chen had become his most reliable employer, finding projects for him with the persistence of someone who understood that idle hands were dangerous things for men like him. "You fix my back steps today," she'd announced this morning, appearing at his door with a thermos of coffee and the kind of determined expression that made arguments pointless. "And Mrs. Rodriguez needs her garage door adjusted. Keep busy, Daniel. Busy hands, quiet mind." The work was simple, honest labor that let him feel useful without requiring him to trust anyone else or risk letting them down. He'd developed a reputation as the reliable handyman who showed up on time, worked quietly, and never asked for more than fair payment. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life that didn't hurt anyone else. As the evening light began to fade, Daniel noticed the playground emptying out. The young mother gathered her toddler, the teenage couple sharing earbuds on the far bench packed up their homework, and the joggers completed their circuits with the satisfied exhaustion of people who had somewhere important to be afterward. Soon it would be just Daniel and the lengthening shadows, another Tuesday evening meditation on the life he'd lost and the person he was trying to become. That's when he heard the crying. At first, he thought it might be a cat. Sound was small and desperate, coming from somewhere near the old climbing structure. But as he stood and moved closer, the crying resolved into something unmistakably human. A child's voice, muffled and broken, the kind of sobbing that came from deep wells of fear and confusion. Daniel found her huddled beneath the slide, a little girl who couldn't have been older than 7. Her clothes were rumpled and dirty, a pink dress that had seen better days and tiny sneakers with no socks. But it was her face that stopped him, cold-streaked with tears and dirt, eyes wide with the kind of terror that belonged to nightmares, not Tuesday evenings in peaceful parks. In her small fist, she clutched something that made Daniel's heart contract, a torn photograph. The kind of family portrait that used to sit on mantels before it had been crumpled and creased by desperate little fingers. He could see fragments of smiling faces, a woman's hand on a child's shoulder, the corner of what might have been a birthday cake. The photo was her anchor to something that was supposed to be safe, now reduced to painful evidence of loss. "Hey there," Daniel said softly, crouching down to her level, the way he remembered doing with Sophia when she was small and the world seemed too big and frightening. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. She studied his face with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned that not all adults could be trusted, but who desperately needed one to prove her wrong. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "She fell down, and I don't know where she went." Something shifted inside Daniel's chest, a rusty mechanism that hadn't moved in years, suddenly grinding back to life. This child's pain called to every paternal instinct he'd thought he'd forfeited when Sophia walked away. Her helplessness reminded him of every night he'd failed to come home on time, every promise he'd broken, every moment when he should have been the father Sophia deserved, instead of the disappointment she got. "What's your name, honey?" he asked, settling more comfortably beside the slide, giving her space but staying close enough that she could reach him if she wanted to. "Emma," she said, and then, with the formality of someone who'd been taught proper introductions, "Emma Louise Patterson. I'm 7 years old, and I live at 412 Maple Street with my mommy." The address was only 6 blocks away, in one of the older neighborhoods where the houses pressed close together and the street lamps cast long shadows that could hide too many secrets. Daniel knew the area well. He'd done work on several houses there over the past year, including a roof repair for the Hendersons at 408 Maple just last month. "That's a pretty name, Emma," Daniel said. "I'm Daniel. Can you tell me what happened to your mummy?" Emma's grip tightened on the torn photograph, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "We were at home, and then the bad men came. Mommy told me to hide in the closet, but I could hear them yelling at her. And then everything got quiet, and when I came out, she was gone." The simple words carried a weight that made Daniel's hands tremble. This wasn't a case of a child wandering away from her mother at the park or getting separated in a crowd. This was something darker, something that had driven a 7-year-old girl to walk 6 blocks alone in the growing darkness, clutching a torn photograph and looking for help from strangers. "Emma, when did this happen? When did your mommy fall down?" "Yesterday," she said. And then, with the uncertainty of someone for whom time had become fluid with fear, "Or maybe this morning. I slept in the closet because I was scared to come out." Daniel felt his protective instincts surge with an intensity that surprised him. This child had been alone and terrified for hours, maybe longer, while he'd been sitting on park benches and fixing other people's broken things. The thought of Emma hiding in a closet, waiting for her mother to come back, not understanding that the silence meant something terrible had happened, made him want to gather her up and promise that everything would be okay. But he'd learned to be careful with promises. They were too easy to break, too painful when they crumbled under the weight of reality. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently touched her shoulder. "Emma, I'm going to help you find your mummy, okay? But first, we need to get you somewhere safe and warm. Are you hungry?" She nodded, a small motion that seemed to take enormous effort. "I'm really hungry. And thirsty too." "Okay then. I know a place where we can get you some food and figure out how to help your mummy. Is that all right with you?" Emma studied his face again, and Daniel found himself holding his breath. He understood that this moment mattered more than all his careful rehabilitation, all his small acts of service, all his attempts to prove he could be trusted. This child's trust would either validate the man he was trying to become, or confirm that some failures were too complete to ever overcome. Finally, Emma nodded and allowed him to help her stand. Her small hand slipped into his with the kind of faith that made his throat tight with emotion. As they walked together toward the park entrance, Daniel realized that his quiet life of invisible service was about to end. For the first time in 3 years, someone needed him not just to fix what was broken, but to be strong enough to protect what was precious. He didn't know it yet, but Emma's torn photograph and whispered plea for help would lead him back to the man he'd been trying to find all along. The police station at night felt like a place where hope went to die. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in the sickly yellow glow of institutional indifference. Daniel sat beside Emma on a plastic chair that had seen too many desperate people waiting for answers that never came. She'd fallen asleep against his shoulder 20 minutes ago, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion after he'd managed to get some food into her at the diner down the street. Detective Martinez looked tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from seeing too much human misery and not having enough resources to fix any of it. She was younger than Daniel expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that had learned to maintain professional distance even when her heart wanted to break. "Mr. Reyes, I understand your concern," she said, flipping through a thin file that contained Emma's information. "But situations like this, they're usually not as sinister as they appear. Domestic disputes, custody issues, family members taking off for a few days, these things resolve themselves more often than not." Daniel kept his voice low, mindful of Emma sleeping against him. "Detective, this child has been alone for at least 24 hours. She's talking about bad men and her mother falling down. That doesn't sound like a custody dispute to me." Martinez sighed, a sound that carried the weight of too many similar conversations. "I've sent a unit to check the address she gave us. 412 Maple Street shows no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The neighbors haven't seen anything unusual. Mrs. Patterson, that's the mother's name, Linda Patterson, she's had some issues in the past. Drug-related arrests, an ex-boyfriend with a record. Sometimes people in those situations decide they need to disappear for a while. And they leave their 7-year-old daughter behind? It happens more than you'd think." Martinez closed the file with a snap that sounded like a door closing. "Look, we'll keep the report open, put out a bolo for the mother. But unless we find evidence of foul play, there's not much else we can do. Child Services will take custody of Emma tomorrow morning." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The idea of Emma disappearing into the foster care system while her mother was potentially in real danger seemed wrong on every level. He'd seen enough broken families in his construction days to know that the system meant well, but it was overwhelmed and underfunded. Children got lost in the shuffle, especially children whose mothers had complicated histories. "What if I could provide evidence?" Daniel asked. "What if there really was foul play?" Martinez studied him with the careful attention of someone trying to determine if she was looking at a helpful citizen or a potential problem. "Mr. Reyes, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but you're not law enforcement. You can't just go around playing detective because you feel sorry for this kid." But Daniel was already thinking like the construction foreman he used to be, the man who could look at a job site and see all the details that others missed. Emma had said her mother fell down, but children that age were usually literal in their descriptions. If Linda Patterson had fallen, there would be signs. If men had come to the house and taken her, there would be evidence. "Detective, give me one day. Let me take Emma back to her house. See if there's anything you might have missed." "Absolutely not. I can't authorize a civilian to—" "Then don't authorize it," Daniel interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of the authority he'd once wielded on construction sites. "I'm a neighbor helping a child find her missing mother. There's nothing illegal about that." Martinez looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel could see her weighing the bureaucratic headache of arguing with him against the reality that her department was stretched too thin to properly investigate every missing person case that walked through their doors. "If you interfere with an active investigation—" "There is no active investigation," Daniel said quietly. "You just told me you don't have evidence of foul play." The detective's smile was tired but not unkind. "You're going to do this regardless of what I say, aren't you?" "I'm going to help this child find her mother." Martinez pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My direct number. If you find anything, and I mean anything, you call me immediately. Don't try to be a hero, Mr. Reyes. Heroes have a tendency to end up dead." Dawn was breaking over Maple Street by the time Daniel and Emma approached number 412. The house was a small two-story with peeling paint and a front porch that sagged like a tired smile. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered from the front door, but Daniel could see that it had been put up hastily, more as a formality than because anyone expected to return. Emma's hand tightened in his as they walked up the cracked sidewalk. "I don't want to go in there," she whispered. "You don't have to, sweetheart. You can wait right here on the porch while I look around, okay?" But Emma shook her head, her grip on the torn photograph in her other hand becoming fierce. "No, I want to help find Mommy." Daniel understood. Sometimes the only way to face fear was to walk straight through it, and Emma had already shown more courage than most adults he knew. The front door was unlocked, which immediately raised Daniel's suspicions. In his experience, people fleeing domestic situations didn't usually leave their doors open for anyone to enter. The living room looked normal at first glance. See a couch with faded floral upholstery, a television with rabbit ears, toys scattered on the carpet. But Daniel's trained eye began to notice details that the responding officers had apparently missed. The coffee table was pushed several inches away from the couch, its usual position marked by indentations in the old carpet. One of the throw pillows was on the floor instead of neatly arranged with the others. A lampshade sat crooked, as if it had been bumped during some kind of struggle. "Emma, can you show me exactly where you were hiding?" She led him to a small coat closet near the front door. Inside, Daniel could see where she'd made a nest among the winter coats, a small depression in the fabric where she'd curled up to wait for her mother's return. On the floor of the closet, almost hidden beneath a fallen scarf, Daniel found something that made his blood run cold. It was a silver locket, heart-shaped and delicate, with a thin chain that had clearly been broken. Daniel picked it up carefully, noting the small dent in the metal that suggested it had been pulled off forcefully rather than simply falling. "Emma, is this your mummy's?" The little girl nodded, her eyes wide. "She never takes it off. It has pictures of me and my daddy inside." Daniel opened the locket with careful fingers. Inside were two tiny photographs, Emma as a toddler with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin, and a man in military fatigues with kind eyes and Emma's same stubborn chin. The man in the photo looked like someone who would never willingly leave his family unprotected. "Where is your daddy, Emma?" "He's in heaven," she said matter-of-factly, the way children do when they've had to accept truths too large for their understanding. "Mommy said he was a soldier, and he went to heaven protecting other people." The locket felt heavy in Daniel's palm, weighted with more than just silver and memory. This wasn't the kind of jewelry a woman removed casually or lost during routine daily activities. The broken chain and the location where he'd found it told a story of violence, of someone grabbing Linda Patterson hard enough to break the necklace and probably drag her away from the closet where her daughter was hiding. Daniel continued his examination of the house, his construction experience helping him read the subtle signs of disturbance. In the kitchen, one of the chairs was pushed back from the table at an odd angle. The back door, which Emma said was always locked, showed scratches around the deadbolt as if someone had forced it open from the outside. But it was upstairs in Linda's bedroom that Daniel found the evidence that convinced him Emma's mother hadn't left willingly. The dresser drawers were all slightly open, their contents disturbed as if someone had searched through them quickly. But most telling was what wasn't there. Linda's purse was missing, but her wallet lay open on the nightstand with her driver's license and credit cards still inside. Her cell phone was plugged into the charger by the bed, its screen dark. No woman fleeing a domestic situation would leave her identification and phone behind, but take an empty purse. Daniel sat on the edge of Linda's bed, feeling the weight of understanding settle on his shoulders. Emma's mother hadn't left. She'd been taken, probably by the bad men Emma had heard arguing with her. The question was where they'd taken her and whether she was still alive. Emma appeared in the doorway, still clutching her torn photograph. "Did you find clues about Mommy?" Daniel looked at this brave little girl who'd survived a night of terror and was still hoping for answers, and he made a decision that would change both their lives. He couldn't give her false hope, but he couldn't abandon her to a system that had already written off her mother as another addict who'd run away from responsibility. "I found clues," he said gently, "and I'm going to keep looking until we find her." Emma crossed the room and climbed onto the bed beside him, her small body settling against his side with the trust of someone who had decided he was safe. "Promise?" Daniel thought about all the promises he'd broken, all the times he'd let people down when they needed him most. He thought about Sophia's angry words in the courthouse parking lot and the stack of unopened letters on his kitchen table. He thought about Detective Martinez's warning about heroes ending up dead. Then he looked down at Emma's upturned face, saw the hope there that only a child could maintain in the face of such darkness, and realized that some promises were worth the risk of breaking. "I promise," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Daniel's yellow hard hat sat on his kitchen table like a relic from another life, its surface scratched and dented from years of honest work. He hadn't worn it since the day he'd cleaned out his foreman's trailer, but seeing it now reminded him of the man he used to be, someone who could look at a complex problem and break it down into manageable pieces, someone who could lead a team through challenges that seemed impossible. Emma sat across from him, eating cereal from one of his mismatched bowls while he studied the locket they'd found in her house. The morning light streaming through his kitchen window made the silver gleam, and Daniel found himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them here. A missing mother, a frightened child, and evidence that the police had either missed or chosen to ignore. "Mr. Daniel," Emma said around a mouthful of cornflakes, "are you going to fix this like you fix other things?" The question stopped him cold. In Emma's 7-year-old logic, he was the man who made broken things work again. She'd heard Mrs. Chen talking about his repairs, had seen him carry his toolbox up and down the apartment building stairs. To her, finding her mother was just another problem that needed solving, another broken thing that required the right tools and the right approach. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Daniel had spent 2 hours the night before lying awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything he'd observed at 412 Maple Street. The forced back door, the broken locket, the missing purse with the wallet left behind, these weren't random details. They formed a pattern, and patterns could be read by someone who knew how to look. "I'm going to try my best," he told Emma. "But first, we need to talk to some people who might know more about what happened to your mummy." The social worker had been understanding about the temporary arrangement. Daniel's background check had come back clean, and his references from neighbors painted him as reliable and trustworthy. Emma would stay with him for a few more days while they attempted to locate any other family members, but Daniel knew that time was running out. If Linda Patterson didn't surface soon, Emma would disappear into the foster system, and any chance of finding the truth would disappear with her. Their first stop was Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down from the Patterson place. Daniel had repaired her garage door the previous month, and she'd impressed him as the kind of neighbor who noticed everything that happened on her street. "Oh yes, that poor woman," Mrs. Rodriguez said, settling her considerable bulk onto her front porch swing. "I always worried about Linda, you know. Sweet girl, but she had troubles. Ever since her husband died in Afghanistan, she's been struggling." Emma squeezed Daniel's hand tighter at the mention of her father, but she stayed quiet, seeming to understand that adult conversations sometimes contained information that children needed to hear, even when it hurt. "Did you notice anything unusual the night before last?" Daniel asked. "Any strange cars, people you didn't recognize?" Mrs. Rodriguez's expression grew troubled. "Well, now that you mention it, there was a black SUV parked across the street for most of the evening. Tinted windows, fancy wheels. Not the kind of car that belongs in this neighborhood, you know. I thought maybe it was someone visiting the Hendersons, but when I looked out later, it was gone." "What time did it leave?" "Must have been after 10, because I was watching the late news when I heard car doors slamming. Looked out and saw the SUV pulling away fast, like they were in a hurry." Daniel felt pieces clicking into place. "Mrs. Rodriguez, had you seen that SUV before?" The older woman nodded grimly. 3 or 4 times over the past month. Always in the evening, always parked where they could watch Linda's house. I thought about calling the police, but you know how they are about domestic situations. They don't get involved until someone's already dead." The next conversation was with Tommy Henderson, a teenager who lived across the street and had a summer job mowing lawns in the neighborhood. Daniel found him in his backyard, working on a motorcycle engine with the focused intensity of someone who understood that machines could be trusted in ways that people couldn't. "Yeah, I saw the SUV," Tommy said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Black Escalade, probably 2018 or 2019. Custom rims, maybe worth more than my dad's car. The guys inside looked like they were waiting for something. Did you get a look at them?" Tommy shook his head. "Not really, but I could tell they weren't from around here. Everything about them screamed money and trouble, you know. The kind of people who show up in our neighborhood when someone owes the wrong kind of debt." Daniel's stomach tightened. Emma's mother might have been involved with dangerous people, but that didn't mean she deserved whatever had happened to her. And it certainly didn't mean Emma deserved to lose the only parent she had left. "Tommy, this is really important. Did you see anything else? Anything that might help us figure out what happened to Mrs. Patterson?" The teenager looked at Emma, who was standing quietly beside Daniel, and his expression softened. "Look, I didn't see them take her or anything, but I heard shouting from inside the house around 9:30, male voices, angry, and then everything went quiet real fast, like someone had turned off a radio." Emma's grip on Daniel's hand became painful, but she didn't make a sound. Daniel marveled at her strength, at the way she absorbed information that would terrify most adults without falling apart. Their final stop was at the corner market, where Linda worked part-time. The owner, Mr. Patel, was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who seemed genuinely concerned about his missing employee. "Linda is good worker," he said in accented English. "Always on time, never missing money from register. But last few weeks, she seemed very scared about something." "Scared how?" "Jumping at every sound, always looking over shoulder. I ask her what is wrong, but she says nothing, just tired from taking care of Emma alone." Mr. Patel shook his head sadly. "But I see fear before. During partition in India, when I was a young boy, Linda had that same fear, the fear of people who know someone is hunting them. Did she mention anyone specific? Anyone who might have been threatening her? Mr. Patel hesitated, glancing around his small store, as if making sure they were truly alone. She mentioned ex-boyfriend once. Bad man, she say. Into drugs, owing money to dangerous people. She tried to break up with him months ago, but he keep coming around, demanding things. What kind of things? Money, mostly, but also information. Linda's husband, before he died in war, he worked for military police, had access to certain records, certain names. This ex-boyfriend, I think he believed Linda still have some of husband's files. Daniel felt another piece of the puzzle snap into place. Mr. Patel, do you know this ex-boyfriend's name? Marcus something. Marcus Cole, I think. Linda never say much about him, but when she do, she get very quiet, very scared. As they walked back to Daniel's truck, Emma looked up at him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone her age. The bad men took Mommy because of Daddy's work. Daniel stopped walking and crouched down to Emma's level, the way he wished he'd done more often when Sophia was young and needed explanations for things that made no sense. It looks that way, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean it's your daddy's fault or your mommy's fault. Sometimes bad people do bad things and good people get hurt. That's not fair, but it's not anyone's fault except the bad people. Emma nodded solemnly, clutching her torn photograph against her chest. Are you going to stop the bad people? Daniel looked at this brave little girl who'd already lost her father to war and might be losing her mother to the kind of violence that too often spilled over into the lives of innocent people. He thought about his hard hat sitting on his kitchen table, about the skills he'd developed over decades of building things that were meant to last, and about the promise he'd made in Linda Patterson's bedroom. I'm going to try, he said, but I'm going to need help from some friends. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on his couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit he'd bought her at the store, Daniel made a phone call he hadn't made in over a year. Miguel, it's Daniel Reyes. I know it's been a while, but I need your help with something. And Miguel, bring your tools. The crayon drawing had been tucked in Daniel's wallet for so long that the edges were soft with wear. He'd found it while looking for his insurance card, and now it lay on his kitchen table beside Emma's torn photograph too, images of fathers and daughters, separated by years and circumstances, but connected by the invisible threads that bind families together. In the drawing, stick figure Daniel and stick figure Sophia stood beside a lopsided treehouse, both figures smiling beneath a yellow sun that took up half the page. Sophia had been 8 when she'd made it, proud of the planning they'd done together for the treehouse that was going to be the best in the whole neighborhood. The treehouse had never gotten built. Work had gotten busy, then the drinking had gotten worse, and eventually Sophia had stopped asking about it altogether. Emma sat across from him, working on her own drawing with the focused concentration of someone who had important work to do. She'd been staying with Daniel for 3 days now, and they'd fallen into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Breakfast together, followed by Daniel's work calls while Emma played quietly with toys Mrs. Chen had mysteriously produced from her apartment. Afternoons spent talking to neighbors and gathering information about Linda's disappearance. Evenings watching old movies and reading library books until Emma fell asleep on his couch. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Daniel asked, looking up from the notes he'd been making about Marcus Cole. "It's you and me finding Mommy," Emma said, holding up her paper. In her drawing, 2 stick figures held hands while walking toward a house where a third figure waited in a window. The proportions were wrong, and the colors bled outside the lines, but the hope in the image was unmistakable. Daniel's throat tightened. "That's beautiful, Emma. When we find her, I'm going to give it to her so she knows we never stopped looking." The faith in Emma's voice reminded Daniel of Sophia at that age, back when she still believed her father could fix anything that was broken. Before he'd taught her that some things like trust and promises and families were more fragile than they appeared. His phone rang, interrupting the moment. Miguel's name appeared on the screen, and Daniel felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. His old friend had agreed to help, but Daniel wasn't sure what that help would cost. "Danny boy." Miguel's familiar voice filled the kitchen. "I've been asking around about your Marcus Cole situation. You sitting down?" Daniel glanced at Emma, who was adding flowers to her drawing with careful yellow strokes. "Go ahead." Marcus Cole, 34, multiple arrests for drug possession and assault, currently on probation for breaking into his ex-girlfriend's apartment and threatening her with a knife. This guy's bad news, Danny. The kind of bad news that normal people cross the street to avoid. What about connections? Who's he working with? That's where it gets interesting. Word is he's been running errands for the Vasquez organization, small-time stuff, mostly collecting debts, intimidating witnesses, that kind of thing. But recently he's been talking about having something big, something that could set him up for life. Daniel's pen stopped moving across his notepad. Something like military police records? Could be. The Vasquez people, they're always looking for leverage on cops and federal agents. Information like that would be worth serious money to the right buyer. "Miguel, I need to find this guy." The line went quiet for a moment, and Daniel could hear the sound of traffic in the background. "Danny, listen to me. These aren't the kind of people you want to mess with. The Vasquez organization, they don't negotiate. They don't give warnings. If Marcus has this woman, and if she's seen their faces..." "I know." Daniel looked at Emma, who was now drawing what appeared to be a dog beside the house. "But I can't just walk away." "Why not?" "You don't owe these people anything." Daniel thought about how to explain it, how to put into words the way Emma's trust had awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead forever. Because someone needs to. Because this little girl deserves to know what happened to her mother. Because maybe, for once in my life, I can be the kind of man who doesn't let people down when they need him most. Miguel sighed, the sound of a friend recognizing an argument he wasn't going to win. "All right, but we do this smart, Danny. No cowboy stuff. I've got some contacts in the department who owe me favors. Let me see what I can find out about where Cole's been spending his time." After the call ended, Daniel found himself staring at Sophia's drawing again. The treehouse they'd never built had become a symbol of everything he'd failed to follow through on, every promise he'd made and broken. But looking at Emma's hopeful artwork, he realized that some promises could still be kept, even if they weren't the ones you'd originally made. His phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment his heart leaped with the wild hope that it might be Sophia. Instead, it was from Detective Martinez. "Any luck with your amateur investigation?" Daniel typed back, "Found evidence of boyfriend with criminal connections. Marcus Cole. Worth looking into." The response came quickly. "Already checked him out. Has an alibi for Tuesday night. Girlfriend confirms he was with her all evening." "Alibis can be bought," Daniel replied. "So can a lot of things. Still no evidence of actual crime. Child Services wants to place Emma tomorrow." Daniel's hands tightened around the phone. Tomorrow. He had less than 24 hours before Emma disappeared into the system, and any chance of finding Linda disappeared with her. "Mr. Daniel?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you okay?" He looked up to find her watching him with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for signs of danger. Her crayon was suspended over her drawing, and Daniel realized that his expression had frightened her. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about how to help your mummy." Emma climbed down from her chair and walked around the table to stand beside him. Without saying anything, she leaned against his arm and rested her head on his shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Daniel felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. "I know you're going to find her," Emma said quietly, "because you're good at fixing things, and Mommy is just broken, not gone forever." Daniel wrapped his arm around Emma's small shoulders and pulled her closer. "What makes you so sure?" "Because Sophia told me." Daniel went very still. "Emma, honey, who is Sophia?" "The girl in the picture in your wallet. When I was looking for a tissue yesterday, I saw her picture, and she looked kind, so I told her about Mommy being lost. She said her daddy was really good at finding things that were lost, even when he thought he wasn't." Emma spoke with the matter-of-fact tone of someone relating a perfectly normal conversation, but Daniel felt the world tilt slightly around him. Children talk to photographs sometimes, he knew that. It didn't mean anything supernatural or mystical. But hearing Emma describe a conversation with Sophia, hearing her relay the kind of faith in him that his actual daughter had lost years ago, made something crack open inside his chest. She said something else too, Emma continued, her voice getting sleepy as the day's emotions caught up with her. She said that sometimes grown-ups have to say sorry for things that happened a long time ago before they can fix the things that are happening right now. Daniel closed his eyes, thinking about the stack of unopened letters on his kitchen table and the words he'd written and rewritten but never found the courage to say out loud. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe some kinds of fixing required dealing with old breaks before you could address new ones. Emma, would it be okay if I made a phone call? A very important phone call to someone I should have talked to a long time ago. Emma nodded against his shoulder. Is it to Sophia? Yes. Good. I think she's been waiting for you to call. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch with her drawing clutched in her small fist, Daniel sat in his kitchen staring at his phone. Sophia's number was programmed into his contacts, though he hadn't used it in 6 months. His finger hovered over the call button, while his heart hammered against his ribs. The phone rang 3 times before Sophia's voice filled the silence of his kitchen. Dad. The word hit him like a physical blow. She'd called him Dad, not Daniel, or Mr. Reyes, or any of the formal distances she'd maintained since the divorce. Sophia. Too wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. Her voice was cautious but not angry. But when I saw it was you calling this late, I thought something might be wrong. Something is wrong, Daniel said. And then, because honesty was the only foundation strong enough to build on, he added, a lot of things are wrong, but I'm trying to fix them. He told her about Emma, about Linda's disappearance, about the promise he'd made to a 7-year-old girl who reminded him of everything good he'd lost through his own failures. Sophia listened without interrupting, and Daniel could hear something in her silence that might have been surprise or might have been the beginning of something like pride. Dad, she said when he finished, you know you could get yourself killed doing this, right? I know, but Sophia, I can't walk away from her. I can't be the kind of man who lets down another child who's counting on him. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of disappointment and hurt, and the fragile possibility of forgiveness. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice soft but steady. Then don't be that man. Be the father you wanted to be. Be the father you still can be. The missing person flyer looked amateurish compared to the professional posters that usually appeared on community bulletin boards. Daniel had printed it at the library using a photo Emma had helped him find in Linda's house, a snapshot from last Christmas showing a woman with kind eyes and Emma's stubborn chin, both of them wearing matching reindeer sweaters and genuine smiles. Missing. Linda Patterson, 29, last seen Tuesday evening at 412 Maple Street. If you have any information, please call Daniel Reyes, followed by his phone number. It wasn't much, but it was something tangible to put into the world, a way of saying that Linda Patterson mattered enough for someone to care about her disappearance. Emma helped him staple flyers to telephone poles and tape them to shop windows throughout the neighborhood. Most business owners were sympathetic, recognizing Emma as the sweet little girl who sometimes came in with her mother for groceries or school supplies. But Daniel noticed how their expressions changed when they read Linda's name, how their sympathy became edged with the kind of judgment reserved for people whose troubles were assumed to be self-inflicted. She was always a little wild, Mrs. Thompson at the hardware store said, shaking her head as she allowed Daniel to post the flyer by her register. Ever since her husband died, she's been running with the wrong crowd. I feel sorry for the little one, but some people make their own problems. Daniel bit back the response that wanted to escape that Linda Patterson was someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone whose life had value regardless of the mistakes she might have made. Instead, he thanked Mrs. Thompson for her cooperation and guided Emma back onto the sidewalk. "Why don't people want to help find Mommy?" Emma asked as they walked toward the next business on their list. It was a question that cut straight to the heart of everything Daniel had been thinking about human nature and judgment, and the way society decided which victims deserved compassion. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that some people were considered disposable, that mothers with complicated histories were often written off as cautionary tales rather than human beings worthy of rescue? "Some people are scared," he said finally. "When bad things happen to other people, it's easier to believe those people did something to deserve it. That way, they can tell themselves that bad things won't happen to them because they're different, they're better." Emma considered this with the serious expression she wore when processing information that adults took for granted. "But that's not true, is it? Bad things can happen to anyone." "That's right. Bad things can happen to anyone, and when they do, those people deserve help, not judgment." They spent the morning visiting every business on Maple Street and the surrounding blocks. The responses varied some. Shopkeepers were genuinely concerned and promised to keep an eye out for Linda. Others took the flyers with polite disinterest, and a few refused altogether, making it clear that they wanted nothing to do with whatever trouble Linda Patterson had gotten herself into. At the gas station on the corner of Maple and Oak, Daniel struck up a conversation with the owner, a man named Jose, who'd known Linda since she was a teenager. "Linda's had a hard life," Jose said, accepting a flyer and immediately taping it to the window behind his register. "Lost her parents in a car accident when she was 17, married young to a soldier who seemed like her ticket to stability. When David died in Afghanistan, she was left with a baby and no real family support. That's when the troubles started." "What kind of troubles?" "Depression, mostly. Started drinking too much, got involved with Marcus Cole when she was vulnerable and grieving. He seemed like he wanted to take care of her and Emma, but really he was just looking for someone to use." Daniel felt the familiar anger that came with stories of predators who targeted people in their weakest moments. "How long were they together?" "On and off for about 2 years. Linda kept trying to break it off, but Marcus wouldn't let go. Said he loved her, but it was the kind of love that owns people instead of cherishing them. You know what I mean?" Daniel knew exactly what he meant. He'd seen it in construction crews and neighborhood barsmen who confused possession with affection, who became dangerous when their control was threatened. "Jose, when was the last time you saw Marcus around here?" The gas station owner's expression grew troubled. "About 2 weeks ago. He came in asking questions about Linda, wanted to know if she'd been talking to anyone about David's military service. Seemed really agitated when I told him I didn't know anything about that." "Did he say why he was interested in David's service record?" "Not exactly, but he kept talking about how David had access to information that could be valuable to the right people. Said Linda was sitting on a gold mine and didn't even know it." Daniel felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. If Marcus believed Linda had access to valuable military intelligence, that would explain the escalation in his behavior, the desperation that had led to kidnapping rather than simple harassment. Their next stop was the elementary school where Emma was supposed to start 2nd grade in 2 weeks. The principal, Mrs. Foster, was a woman in her 50s, with the kind of warm authority that suggested she'd spent decades helping children navigate difficult situations. "Emma's been through so much already," she said, crouching down to Emma's level in the hallway outside her office. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "Mr. Daniel is helping me find Mommy," Emma said with the confidence of someone whose world had recently stabilized around one trustworthy adult. "He's really good at fixing things." Mrs. Foster's eyes met Daniel's over Emma's head, and he saw understanding there, the recognition of someone who'd seen too many children caught in adult chaos and knew how precious it was when a reliable adult stepped up to help. "Linda came in last month to register Emma for classes," Mrs. Foster told Daniel quietly. "She seemed very anxious, kept checking her phone and looking over her shoulder. When I asked if everything was all right, she said she was worried about her ex-boyfriend finding out where Emma would be going to school." "Did she mention his name?" "Marcus something. She said he'd been pressuring her about some documents her late husband had left behind, military files that she claimed not to have." She was scared he might try to use Emma to force her to cooperate. Daniel's blood ran cold. If Marcus was willing to threaten a child to get what he wanted, the situation was even more dangerous than he'd realized. By afternoon, they'd distributed nearly 50 flyers throughout the neighborhood. Daniel's phone had rung twice, once from someone who thought they might have seen Linda at a bus stop 3 days ago, and once from a teenager who admitted he was just calling because he was bored. Neither lead had panned out, but Daniel told himself that information gathering was a slow process, that patience was as important as persistence. That evening, as Emma worked on another drawing at his kitchen table, Daniel spread out everything they'd learned on a piece of poster board, like a detective building a case. Linda's photo in the center, surrounded by index cards containing information about Marcus Cole, the Vasquez organization, David Patterson's military service, and the timeline of Linda's disappearance. Emma looked up from her artwork. Tonight's project appeared to be a castle with flags on all the Towersan studied Daniel's makeshift evidence board. "It looks like the puzzles Mommy and I do," she said, "except some of the pieces are still missing." "That's exactly what it is," Daniel said, "and you're right, we're still missing some important pieces, like where the bad men took Mommy, and why they took her, and what they want from her." Emma climbed down from her chair and walked over to the poster board, studying it with the focused attention of someone much older than 7. "Mr. Daniel, what if Mommy does have Daddy's papers, but she hid them somewhere the bad men can't find them?" Daniel paused, his pen halfway to adding another note. "What makes you think that?" "Because Mommy always hides important things. She hides our emergency money in a jar behind the cereal boxes. She hides my birthday presents in the closet under the winter coats. And she hides Daddy's army box under her bed, where she thinks I don't know about it." "Emma, what's in your Daddy's army box?" "Letters and medals and papers with lots of numbers on them. Mommy gets sad when she looks at them, so she only takes the box out when I'm supposed to be asleep, but sometimes I peek." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. If Linda had hidden David's military documents in a place that Marcus hadn't been able to find them during his search of the house, that might explain why he'd taken her, instead of simply ransacking the place more thoroughly. "Emma, do you think you could remember where exactly under the bed the box was hidden?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "It's in a big suitcase way back in the corner where the dust bunnies live. Mommy always has to crawl way under to reach it." Daniel looked at his evidence board, then at Emma's hopeful face, then at the clock on his kitchen wall. It was almost 8 p.m., well past a reasonable time to be taking a child back to a house where her mother had been kidnapped. But if David Patterson's documents were still hidden there, they might be the key to understanding what Marcus wanted, and more importantly, what he might be willing to trade for Linda's safe return. "Emma, how would you feel about taking one more trip to your house, just to look for your Daddy's box?" Emma's expression grew serious, the way it did whenever she was asked to be brave about something that frightened her. "Will you stay with me the whole time?" "Every single second." "Then okay. If it helps find Mommy, then okay." As they drove through the darkening streets toward Maple Street, Daniel found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Sophia the night before. She'd listened to his story about Emma and Linda without judgment, had even offered to help if he needed anything. For the first time in 3 years, his daughter had sounded proud of him instead of disappointed. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe some kinds of fixing required going back to retrieve the pieces that had been lost or hidden, examining them in the light, and figuring out how they fit into the larger picture. Maybe finding Linda Patterson would also mean finding the father he'd always wanted to be, but had never quite managed to become. 412 Maple Street looked different in the gathering darkness. The yellow crime scene tape had been removed, but the house still felt abandoned, like a place where happiness had once lived but had packed up and moved away without leaving a forwarding address. Emma's small hand in his felt steady as they approached the front door, and Daniel marveled again at this child's resilience, her ability to face frightening situations, because she understood that sometimes courage was the only path back to the people you loved. "Ready?" he asked, as he turned the key in the lock. "Ready," Emma whispered, and together they stepped into the darkness of the house, where all their answers waited to be found. The threatening note was simple, direct, and terrifying in its brevity. "Stop looking, or the girl loses her mother permanently." It had been tucked under Daniel's windshield wiper while he and Emma were inside the house, searching for David Patterson's documents, which meant someone had been watching them, following their movements, waiting for the right moment to deliver their message. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words again, standing in the driveway of 412 Maple Street, with Emma beside him. Both of them illuminated by the harsh glow of a streetlight that made everything feel like a crime scene. The paper was ordinary computer printing paper, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. The message was printed in a generic font that revealed nothing about its author, except their willingness to threaten a child to get what they wanted. "What does it say, Mr. Daniel?" Emma asked, tugging at his sleeve. Daniel folded the note quickly, slipping it into his pocket before Emma could see the words that had made his blood run cold. "Just some information about your mummy," he said, hating himself for the lie but knowing that Emma had already carried too much fear for someone her age. But Emma wasn't fooled. She'd survived 3 days of terror by learning to read adult faces for signs of danger, and Daniel's expression apparently told her everything she needed to know. "The bad men know we're looking for Mommy," she said. Not a question, but a statement, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who'd learned that the world contained people who meant harm to those who couldn't protect themselves. Daniel crouched down to Emma's level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're going to keep looking for your mummy, but we're going to be extra careful now. That means staying close to me at all times, and if I tell you to do something quickly, you do it without asking questions. Can you do that?" Emma nodded solemnly, like a safety drill at school. Exactly like that. The search of Linda's bedroom had yielded the jackpot Daniel had hoped for. David Patterson's military documents were exactly where Emma said they'd be, in a battered suitcase, shoved far under the bed, covered with dust, and apparently untouched by whoever had searched the house. The box inside contained letters, medals, photographs, and most importantly, a thick folder of what appeared to be military police investigation reports dating from David's deployment in Afghanistan. Daniel hadn't had time to examine the documents thoroughly, but a quick glance had revealed names, dates, and incident numbers that suggested David had been investigating corruption within his own unit. If Marcus Cole and his associates were selling information to criminal organizations, David's investigation files would be worth a fortune to the right buyers, or dangerous enough to get people killed if they fell into the wrong hands. Now, driving back toward his apartment with the documents secured in a gym bag in his back seat and a threatening note in his pocket, Daniel realized that he and Emma had moved far beyond amateur detective work. They were now in possession of evidence that people were willing to kill for, and the threatening note proved that those people knew exactly who they were and where to find them. His phone rang as they stopped at a red light. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, and Daniel felt a complicated mixture of relief and apprehension. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you told me last night," Sophia said without preamble, "about Emma and her missing mother. I want to help." "Sophia, this isn't your problem. You don't need to get involved in—" "Stop!" Sophia's voice carried the kind of firm authority that reminded Daniel of her mother at her most determined. "You said you're trying to be the father you wanted to be, right? Well, I'm trying to be the daughter I want to be. And the daughter I want to be doesn't let her father face dangerous people alone." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "What did you have in mind?" "I have vacation time coming, and my apartment has 2 bedrooms. Why don't you and Emma come stay with me for a few days? Safety in numbers, and it gives us time to figure out our next move without you having to look over your shoulder constantly." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Daniel found himself speechless. Sophia was voluntarily inviting him into her life, offering to help with a situation that could put her in danger, treating him like the father she'd once believed he could be. "Sophia, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Dad, You called me last night because you needed help, and for the first time in years, it wasn't help cleaning up a mess you'd made. You were asking for help protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. That's the kind of help I'm proud to give." An hour later, Daniel found himself carrying Emma's few belongings up the stairs to Sophia's apartment in a converted Victorian house on the other side of town. Sophia met them at the door, and Daniel felt his breath catch as he saw his daughter clearly for the first time in 2 years. She was 25 now, a young woman with her mother's dark hair and Daniel's stubborn jaw, wearing jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt that suggested she'd been working on something creative. But it was her expression that stopped him, cautious but not hostile, curious rather than angry, the look of someone who was willing to take a chance on hope despite having been disappointed before. "Hi, Dad," she said simply. "Hi, sweetheart." Emma, who had been unusually quiet during the drive, stepped forward and looked up at Sophia with the frank assessment of one child meeting another adult who might or might not be trustworthy. "Are you the Sophia from the picture?" Emma asked. Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What picture?" "The one Mr. Daniel keeps in his wallet. The one where you're building a treehouse together." Sophia's eyes found Daniel's over Emma's head, and he saw understanding there, the recognition that some connections transcended time and circumstance, that the bond between a father and daughter could survive years of silence if both people were willing to work at rebuilding it. "I'm that Sophia," she said to Emma, "and you must be the brave girl who's been helping my dad find your mummy." Emma nodded seriously. "He's really good at it, but the bad men left us a scary note." Sophia's expression sharpened. "What kind of note?" Daniel pulled the threatening message from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. Sophia read it twice, her face growing pale. "Dad, this is serious. These people know where you live, where you've been. They're not bluffing." "I know. That's why I'm grateful you offered to let us stay here. But Sophia, I need you to understand what you're getting into. These aren't just local criminals. They're connected to organized crime, and they've already kidnapped Emma's mother. If they think you're helping me, then they'll learn that some things are worth the risk," Sophia said firmly. "Dad, I've spent 3 years being angry at you for not fighting for our family when it mattered. I'm not going to watch you fight for someone else's family and not be there to help." That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in Sophia's spare bedroom, Daniel and his daughter sat at her kitchen table examining David Patterson's documents by lamplight. The investigation files painted a picture of systematic corruption within David's military police, unit weapons, sales, protection rackets, intelligence sharing with insurgent groups. David had been building a case against his commanding officer and several fellow MPs when his convoy was attacked and he was killed. "Dad, look at this," Sophia said, pointing to a report dated 3 weeks before David's death. "He was planning to turn these files over to Army Criminal Investigation Command. Someone in his unit found out and arranged for him to be silenced." Daniel studied the timeline Sophia had sketched out on a legal pad. "So Marcus Cole somehow learned that Linda had these files, and he's been trying to get them so he can sell the information to the highest bidder. But why kidnap her? Why not just break in and search the house more thoroughly? Because he needed her to tell him where the documents were hidden, and maybe because he needed her to verify their authenticity, prove they were the real thing." Sophia leaned back in her chair, running her hands through her hair. "The question is, what do we do with this information? If we turn it over to the police, Marcus might kill Linda before they can find her. But if we try to negotiate with him ourselves, we get ourselves killed too," Daniel finished. "Unless we're very smart about how we approach this." They worked until nearly midnight, developing a plan that was risky but might give them a chance to save Linda while staying alive themselves. It would require careful timing, reliable backup, and a level of trust between Daniel and Sophia that they hadn't shared since she was a child. As Sophia walked him to the door of the spare bedroom where he'd be sleeping on an air mattress, she stopped and placed her hand on his arm. "Dad, I want you to know something. When Emma told me about your conversation with my drawing, about how I supposedly said you were good at finding lost things, I never said that, but I should have. Because it's true." Daniel felt his eyes burn with unexpected tears. Sophia, I'm sorry. For everything I put you and your mother through, for all the times I let you down, for... I know, she said quietly. And Dad, I'm proud of you. For the first time in a long time, I'm proud to be your daughter. As Daniel lay on the air mattress listening to the sounds of Sophia's apartment settling around him, he thought about the threatening note in his pocket and the dangerous plan they'd developed to rescue Linda Patterson. Tomorrow would bring new risks, new chances to fail the people counting on him. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, he was sleeping in the same house as his daughter, and she'd told him she was proud of him. Whatever happened next, he had that. And maybe, if he was very careful and very lucky, he could keep from losing it again. The hospital bracelet was white plastic with black text, unremarkable except for the information it contained. Patterson, Linda M. D.O.B. 3/15/1995. Admit date 8/27/2025. Room 314B. Daniel stared at it, his mind struggling to process what Miguel was telling him, while Emma played quietly with blocks in the corner of Sophia's living room. "She's alive," Miguel said again, his voice low and urgent. "My contact at General Hospital confirmed it. Linda Patterson has been in protective custody in their psychiatric ward since Wednesday morning, about 12 hours after Emma says she disappeared." Daniel felt the world tilt sideways. Protective custody? Miguel, that means she wasn't kidnapped, Sophia said, sinking into the chair beside him. It means she's been safe this whole time. But why? Daniel's voice came out strangled. Why would she leave Emma alone? Why wouldn't she contact someone, let people know she was okay? Miguel pulled out a manila folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table. They showed a woman who was clearly Linda Patterson, but not the Linda from Emma's family photos. This Linda had hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of looking over your shoulder and jumping at every unexpected sound. According to the intake report, she walked into the emergency room Tuesday night claiming that people were trying to kill her, Miguel said. She was incoherent, paranoid, talking about military documents and drug dealers and her ex-boyfriend threatening her daughter. The doctors assumed she was having a psychotic break brought on by drug use or severe stress. Daniel looked at the photos again, seeing past the obvious signs of distress to the fear in Linda's eyes. She wasn't having a psychotic break, she was telling the truth. Yeah, but the hospital didn't know that. They put her on a psychiatric hold, and she's been there ever since, sedated and under observation. The kicker is that she's been asking about Emma constantly. But because she was admitted as a Jane Doe and the doctors thought she was delusional, nobody connected her to the missing person report. Sophia picked up one of the photos, studying Linda's face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. How did she end up as a Jane Doe, if you found her using her real name? She gave them a false name, initially probably out of habit, trying to protect herself and Emma from whoever she was running from. It took my contact 3 days to match her fingerprints to her real identity through the military spouse database. Daniel felt a mixture of relief and confusion washing over him. Linda was alive and safe, which meant Emma wouldn't lose her mother. But it also meant that everything he'd assumed about the situation was wrong. Miguel, if Linda's been in the hospital this whole time, then who left the threatening note on my car? Miguel's expression grew grim. That's where things get complicated. Marcus Cole has been telling people that Linda stole something valuable from him before she disappeared. He's been putting pressure on anyone who might know where she went, trying to track her down. But if he doesn't know where she is, then he's getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things like threatening civilians who get too close to the truth. Emma looked up from her blocks, apparently sensing the shift in the adults' conversation. "Did you find Mommy?" Daniel exchanged glances with Sophia and Miguel. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother was alive, but had been hiding in a hospital while her daughter spent 3 terrifying days believing she'd been kidnapped or killed? "We found her, sweetheart," Daniel said carefully. "She's in a safe place, and she's been asking about you." Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Daniel had seen from her since they'd met. "Can we go see her right now?" "Soon," Sophia said, moving to sit beside Emma on the floor. "But first, the grown-ups need to figure out how to make sure it's safe for you and your mommy to be together again." That was the real problem, Daniel realized. Linda had fled to the hospital because she believed she and Emma were in immediate danger from Marcus Cole and his associates. The threat hadn't disappeared just because she was temporarily safe behind hospital walls. If anything, Marcus's increasing desperation made the situation more volatile. "Miguel, what's Cole's current situation? Is he still actively looking for Linda?" "According to my sources, he's been getting pressure from the Vasquez organization to deliver the military documents he promised them. Word is, they fronted him money for information that he hasn't been able to produce, and they're not the kind of people who accept excuses." Daniel thought about the documents hidden in Sophia's bedroom closet, the investigation files that David Patterson had died trying to expose. If Marcus was being squeezed by organized crime figures who expected a return on their investment, he would be willing to do almost anything to get his hands on those files. "There's something else," Miguel said, his voice growing even more serious. "Cole's been asking around about Emma specifically, wanting to know where she's staying, who's been taking care of her. My guess is he's planning to use her as leverage to force Linda to cooperate." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emma, who was currently arranging blocks into what appeared to be a castle, had no idea that she was being hunted by people who saw her only as a tool to be used against her mother. "We need to get Linda and Emma out of town," Sophia said immediately. "Tonight, before Cole figures out where Emma is." "And go where?" Daniel asked. "These people have connections throughout the region. Running might just delay the problem instead of solving it." Miguel leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What if we don't run? What if we give Cole exactly what he wants?" "You mean the documents?" "I mean the documents and a meeting with Linda, but on our terms, in a controlled situation where we have backup and leverage." Daniel understood immediately what Miguel was suggesting. "A trap." "A trade," Miguel corrected. "Linda's cooperation in exchange for guaranteed safety for her and Emma. But we control the meeting location, we have law enforcement standing by, and we make sure Cole gets arrested before he can disappear with the documents." It was risky, but it had the advantage of forcing a resolution instead of leaving Linda and Emma to spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. And if they were careful about the setup, they might be able to expose the entire corruption network that had gotten David Patterson killed. "I'll need to talk to Linda first," Daniel said. "Make sure she's willing to cooperate and find out exactly what Cole wants from her." "Dad," Sophia said quietly, "are you sure about this? If something goes wrong, if Cole suspects it's a trap, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Sophia, we can't let these people continue threatening a child. Emma deserves to have a normal life with her mother, without constantly being afraid that someone's going to hurt them." Emma looked up from her blocks again. "Mr. Daniel, when we see Mommy, will you tell her about all the people who helped look for her, like Mrs. Chen and Jose at the gas station, and Mrs. Foster at school?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I'll tell her about everyone who cared enough to help, sweetheart. And will you tell her that you're the best fixer in the whole world?" "I'll tell her that I had a very good helper who never gave up hope." That evening, as they prepared to visit Linda at the hospital, Daniel found himself thinking about the unexpected turns their investigation had taken. What had started as a search for a missing mother had become a complex web involving military corruption, organized crime, and a system that too often failed to protect the people who needed help most. But it had also become something else, chance for Daniel to prove that he could be the kind of man who kept his promises, who protected the innocent, who didn't give up when things got difficult. For the first time in years, he was working towards something that mattered more than his own guilt and regret. Emma's torn photograph was still in her pocket, creased and faded from being carried everywhere she went. Soon, if everything went according to plan, she wouldn't need to carry a picture of her family anymore. She'd have the real thing back, safe and whole and together again. And maybe Daniel thought as he watched Sophia help Emma get ready for their hospital visit. Some families could be repaired, even after they seemed broken beyond hope. Maybe some promises could still be kept, even when they were made by people who had broken too many promises before. The hospital bracelet in his pocket felt like a key to a door he hadn't known existed, a door that led not just to Linda Patterson's rescue, but to his own redemption and the possibility of a future where being Emma's friend and Sophia's father meant something real and lasting and good. The letter from Sophia arrived by email at 3:47 a.m., marked urgent and containing words that Daniel had waited 3 years to read. He discovered it while sitting at her kitchen table, unable to sleep as he went over the details of their plan to trap Marcus Cole for the 100th time. The subject line was simple. For Dad. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about trying to be the father you wanted to be, the letter began. I realized I never told you about the father you already were, before everything went wrong. I never told you about the good memories that I kept, even when I was too angry to admit they existed. Daniel's hands trembled as he read, conscious of Sophia sleeping in her bedroom just down the hall, and Emma curled up on the spare room bed, both of them trusting him to keep them safe from the violence that was coming. I remember the treehouse you promised to build me when I was 8. We spent weeks planning it together, drawing blueprints on napkins, measuring the oak tree in our backyard, talking about how it would be our special place where we could go to solve all the world's problems. You never built it, but for months afterward, whenever I was scared or sad, I would sit under that tree and imagine we were up in our treehouse together, just talking. Sophia's words blurred as Daniel's eyes filled. He remembered those planning sessions, remembered the excitement in her voice as she described the windows she wanted, and the rope ladder that would keep their hideout secret from the rest of the world. He'd been so proud of her imagination, so determined to make her dreams real. And then work had gotten busy, and the drinking had gotten worse. And gradually the treehouse had joined the long list of promises he'd failed to keep. I kept the drawings we made together, the letter continued. All these years, through college and the divorce and all the times I was so angry I couldn't stand to think about you, I kept those napkin blueprints in a box under my bed. Because even when I hated you, I loved the father who sat with me for hours, planning something wonderful that existed only in our imagination. Daniel wiped his eyes, aware that daylight was beginning to creep through Sophia's kitchen windows and that they would need to start implementing their plan within hours. Linda had agreed to cooperate, understanding that the only way to protect Emma permanently was to ensure that Marcus Cole and his associates were arrested and convicted. Detective Martinez had reluctantly agreed to provide backup, though she'd made it clear that if anything went wrong, Daniel would face charges for interfering in a police investigation. Emma told me something yesterday while you were on the phone with Miguel, Sophia's letter went on. She said you were different from other grown-ups because you listened to kids like they had important things to say. She said most adults pretend to listen, but they're really just waiting for children to stop talking. But she said you actually hear her, that you understand what she means, even when she doesn't have the right words for it. That observation hit Daniel harder than he'd expected. He thought about all the conversations he'd had with Emma over the past week, about her mother's disappearance, about her fears, about her hopes for their reunion. He'd tried to speak to her honestly without overwhelming her with details she couldn't process, to validate her feelings without making promises he couldn't keep. That's the father I remember from when I was little, Sophia wrote. The one who explained things to me like I was smart enough to understand them, who asked my opinion about things that mattered, who made me feel like my thoughts and feelings were important. I think I stopped believing that father still existed somewhere inside you, but watching you with Emma, I see him again. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Everything's set for tonight. Cole took the bait. Are you ready for this? He typed back, as ready as I'll ever be. The plan they'd developed was elegant in its simplicity. Miguel had reached out to Marcus Cole through intermediaries, claiming that Linda was willing to negotiate for the military documents in exchange for guaranteed safety for herself and Emma. The meeting was set for 8 p.m. at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Tona location that would allow Detective Martinez and her team to position themselves strategically while giving Cole the illusion that he was in control of the situation. Linda would wear a wire and carry a briefcase containing photocopies of David's investigation files. The real documents would remain hidden at Sophia's apartment. If Cole examined the copies and accepted them as genuine, he would be arrested immediately. If he suspected a trap or demanded to see the originals, Linda had instructions to stall while the police moved into position. It was a good plan, Daniel told himself. It minimized the risks to Emma and Linda while maximizing the chances of getting Cole and his associates off the streets permanently. But good plans could still go wrong, especially when they involved desperate criminals who had nothing left to lose. "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you're doing," Sophia's letter concluded. "Not just the investigation and the rescue plan, but the way you've been taking care of Emma. You've given her something she desperately needed, an adult who won't abandon her, who will fight for her even when it's dangerous, who sees her as someone worth protecting instead of just a problem to be managed." Daniel closed his laptop and walked quietly to the spare bedroom where Emma was sleeping. She lay curled on her side, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit he'd bought her, her torn family photograph on the nightstand beside her bed. In sleep, her face had lost the careful watchfulness that had become habitual during her waking hours. She looked like what she was, a little girl who should have been worried about starting second grade instead of whether her mother was alive or dead. In a few hours, if everything went according to plan, Emma would be reunited with Linda and their nightmare would be over. They could go back to being a normal family, dealing with normal problem homework and bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park, where the worst thing that could happen was a scraped knee from falling off the monkey bars. But Daniel also knew that some nightmares didn't end cleanly, that even successful rescues could leave scars that took years to heal. Emma had seen too much, experienced too much, learned too young that the world contained people who would hurt children to get what they wanted. That knowledge would stay with her, would influence how she moved through the world and whom she chose to trust. "Mr. Daniel?" Emma's voice was sleepy, confused. She'd opened her eyes and found him standing in her doorway. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to wake you up. Are you okay? You look sad." Daniel entered the room and sat carefully on the edge of her bed. "I'm not sad. I'm just thinking about important things. About finding Mommy. About keeping you safe. About making sure nothing bad happens to you or your Mommy ever again." Emma sat up and studied his face with the serious attention she gave to problems that required solving. "Mr. Daniel, are you scared about tonight?" The question caught him off guard. Adults weren't supposed to admit fear to children, weren't supposed to burden them with doubts about whether everything would be okay. But Emma had survived by learning to read adult emotions accurately, and lying to her now would be an insult to the intelligence that had kept her alive. "A little bit," he said honestly. "When you care about people, it's natural to worry about keeping them safe." "I'm scared too," Emma admitted. "But I'm also excited because I get to see Mommy again. And I'm not as scared as I was before because now I have you and Sophia helping me." Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Emma, I want you to remember something. No matter what happens tonight, no matter how things turn out, you're going to be okay. Your Mommy loves you very much, and there are people who will always make sure you're taken care of. Like you, like me, and Sophia, and Mrs. Chen and Jose and all the other people who helped look for your Mommy. You're not alone anymore, sweetheart. You're never going to be alone again." Emma reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones, with the fierce grip of someone who'd learned not to let go of good things when she found them. "Will you still be my friend after Mommy comes home?" she asked. "Even when we don't live in your house anymore?" "I'll be your friend for as long as you want me to be," Daniel promised. "Friends don't stop being friends just because they don't live in the same place." "Good," Emma said, settling back into her pillow. "Because you're the best fixer in the whole world, and I might need you to fix other things someday." As Daniel returned to the kitchen, he found Sophia waiting for him with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested she'd heard at least part of his conversation with Emma. "You know she's going to remember this for the rest of her life," Sophia said quietly, handing him one of the coffee cups. "The week when a stranger became the most important adult in her world, when someone she barely knew risked everything to bring her mother home." Daniel sat down across from his daughter, marveling at how natural it felt to share early morning coffee and serious conversation with her, as if the 3 years of silence had been compressed into a brief intermission rather than a fundamental break in their relationship. "I keep thinking about what could go wrong tonight," he admitted. "What if Cole suspects it's a trap? What if he brings more people than we're expecting? What if Linda freezes up and can't go through with it? Dad, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little and got scared about things I couldn't control?" Daniel shook his head, embarrassed by how many of Sophia's childhood memories had been lost to the fog of his drinking years. "You used to say that worrying was like paying interest on trouble that might never come due. You said the best thing to do was prepare as well as you could, then trust that good people working together could handle whatever happened." The words stirred something in Daniel's memoria, faint recollection of bedtime conversations when Sophia was young and afraid of monsters in her closet or bullies at school. He'd forgotten that version of himself, the father who offered comfort and wisdom instead of disappointment and broken promises. "I'm surprised you remember that," he said. "I remember a lot of things about the father you were before the drinking got bad," Sophia said. "Maybe it's time you started remembering them too." By noon, the final preparations were in place. Detective Martinez had confirmed that her team would be in position by 7 p.m., with unmarked units covering all possible escape routes from the warehouse. Miguel had made contact with Marcus Cole's representative and confirmed the meeting time and location. Linda had been briefed on her role and fitted with a wire that would allow police to monitor the conversation and move in if things went wrong. Daniel spent the afternoon going over contingency plans with Sophia, reviewing every possible scenario they could think of and discussing how to respond to each one. Emma helped by drawing pictures of all the people who had helped look for her Mothera visual catalogue of the community that had rallied around a frightened child and refused to let her face her crisis alone. "This one is Mrs. Chen," Emma explained, showing Daniel a drawing of a small figure with grey hair and a determined expression. "She made you eat soup when you were too worried to remember to eat. And this one is Jose from the gas station, who put Mommy's picture in his window where lots of people could see it. And this is Miguel, who knows about finding people who don't want to be found." Each drawing was a testament to the way ordinary people could become extraordinary when a child needed their help. Daniel realized that Emma's recovery from this trauma would be aided not just by professional counseling, but by her understanding that the world contained more good people than bad ones, more helpers than harmers. At 5 p.m., Daniel's phone rang. Detective Martinez's voice was tense. "Reyes, we have a problem. Cole just contacted our intermediary and changed the meeting location. He wants to meet at the old grain elevator by the river instead of the warehouse." Daniel's stomach dropped. The grain elevator was a much more isolated location, surrounded by open ground that would make it difficult for police to approach undetected. It was also a place with multiple levels and hiding spots that could turn into a maze if things went wrong. "Detective, that sounds like he suspects a trap, yeah. But Linda says she's still willing to go through with it. She says she's tired of running and wants this over with, regardless of the risks." Daniel looked at Emma, who was putting the finishing touches on a drawing of him and Sophia standing together beside a house with a chimney that curled smoke into a sunny sky. The image of family togetherness that she'd created made his decision easy. "I'll be there," he told Martinez, "but I want extra backup, and I want everyone to understand that if this goes sideways, protecting Linda is the priority. Emma's been through enough." "Understood. Reyes, be careful tonight. Heroes who get themselves killed can't protect anyone." As evening approached, Daniel found himself standing in Sophia's living room, watching Emma and his daughter work together on a jigsaw puzzle. The domestic scene was so normal, so peaceful, that it was hard to believe that in a few hours he would be walking into a situation that could end with someone dying. "Dad," Sophia said, joining him by the window where he'd been watching the street for any signs of surveillance. "I need you to promise me something." "What's that?" "Promise me that if things go wrong tonight, if it looks like you're not going to make it out safely, you'll think about Emma and remember that she needs you to come home. She's already lost her father to violence. Don't make her lose the next best thing." Daniel turned to look at his daughter, seeing Maria's fierce protectiveness in her expression and recognizing the love that had survived all his failures and mistakes. "I promise," he said. "Sophia, if something does happen to me tonight—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said firmly, "because you're going to be smart and careful and you're going to trust your backup instead of trying to be a hero. Right?" "Right." At 7:30, as Daniel prepared to leave for the grain elevator, Emma approached him with something in her small hands. It was a smooth river rock, perfectly round and warm from being carried in her pocket. "This is my courage stone," she said solemnly. "I found it by the creek behind our house, and Mommy told me it would help me be brave when scary things happened. I want you to have it tonight." Daniel knelt down and accepted the stone, feeling its weight and warmth against his palm. "Emma, this is very special. Are you sure you want me to borrow it?" "I'm sure, because you helped me be brave when I was scared. So now I want to help you be brave too." Daniel slipped the stone into his pocket, where it settled next to Sophia's letter and the original threatening note that had started this final phase of their ordeal. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take very good care of it. And you'll bring it back to me when you bring Mommy home." "I promise." As Daniel drove through the darkening streets toward his confrontation with Marcus Cole, Emma's courage stone felt like a talisman against the uncertainty ahead. Whatever happened at the grain elevator, whatever risks he faced in the next few hours, he would carry with him the trust of a 7-year-old girl who believed he could fix anything that was broken. And maybe, Daniel thought as he watched the city lights blur past his window, that belief was strong enough to make miracles possible, even for people who had spent years convinced they were beyond redemption. Daniel's construction tools had been gathering dust in his truck for months, but tonight they felt like weapons in his hands. The reciprocating saw, the impact driver, the pry-bar instruments that had once helped him build things were now his best hope for protecting Linda Patterson and bringing Emma's mother home safely. The grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky like a monument to abandoned industry, its concrete towers and rusted metal framework creating a maze of shadows and hiding places. Daniel had arrived 30 minutes early, using his construction experience to read the site like a blueprint and identify potential advantages and vulnerabilities. The main structure was 5 stories tall, with a series of connected silos and conveyor systems that created multiple levels and access points. If Marcus Cole had chosen this location to make surveillance difficult, he'd succeeded. The complex layout would challenge even experienced law enforcement officers trying to maintain visual contact with the meeting participants. But Daniel's 25 years in construction had taught him to see buildings as systems, to understand how spaces connected and where the structural weak points were located. The grain elevator might be a maze to most people, but to someone who understood load-bearing walls and access routes, it was readable as any other construction site. Detective Martinez's voice crackled through the earpiece he wore. "Reyes, we have units positioned at all the perimeter exits, but visibility inside the structure is going to be limited. If things go wrong, you need to get Linda to the main entrance where we can extract you safely." Daniel touched the tools on his belt, reassuring himself that they were secure and easily accessible. "Understood. Any sign of Cole's people yet?" 2 vehicles arrived 15 minutes ago. Black SUV matching the description from your witnesses, plus a white panel van that could be used for transport. We count at least 4 individuals, possibly more. The numbers weren't encouraging, but Daniel had expected Cole to bring backup. What mattered was that Linda was willing to go through with the meeting and that law enforcement was in position to respond if negotiations turned violent. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Emma's asleep. She's dreaming about seeing her mom tomorrow. Don't let her down. The message was a reminder of what this was really about, not catching criminals or solving mysteries, but reuniting a little girl with the mother she thought she'd lost forever. Everything else was secondary to that fundamental goal. At exactly 8 p.m., Linda Patterson emerged from the police car that had brought her to the site. She looked fragile in the harsh glare of the security lights, but her expression was determined. The briefcase containing the photocopied documents was handcuffed to her wrist, and the wire she wore was invisible beneath her jacket. "Mr. Reyes," she said quietly as she approached him, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for Emma. She told me about how you took care of her, how you made her feel safe when she was scared." "She's an amazing kid," Daniel replied. "She never gave up hope that we'd find you. I'm sorry I put her through this. When those men came to the house, when I heard them talking about using Emma to force me to cooperate, I panicked. Running to the hospital seemed like the only way to keep her safe, but I never imagined she'd end up alone and terrified." Daniel understood the impossible choice Linda had faced today, and risk having her daughter used as leverage against her, or disappear and hope that Emma would be safe until she could figure out how to protect them both permanently. "You did what you thought was best," he said. "Tonight we're going to make sure you and Emma can be together without looking over your shoulders." A figure emerged from the shadows near the main entrance to the grain elevator. Marcus Cole was younger than Daniel had expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was using something stronger than caffeine to stay alert. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept well in days. "Linda," Cole called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I was starting to think you'd decided to disappear permanently." "I'm here," Linda replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I brought what you wanted. Now let's get this over with." Cole gestured for them to follow him into the main structure of the grain elevator. Daniel's construction instincts immediately kicked in as they entered the building, cataloging exit routes and potential defensive positions. The interior was a web of metal catwalks, concrete platforms, and machinery that had been abandoned for years. Dust motes danced in the beams of flashlights, and every footstep echoed with metallic resonance. "Nice place you picked," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone conversational while his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. "Very private. Privacy is important when you're conducting business that requires discretion," Cole replied. "Mr. Reyes, I have to admit I'm curious about your role in all this. What's your interest in Linda's family affairs?" The question was clearly a test, an attempt to determine whether Daniel was law enforcement or simply a concerned civilian. His answer could influence how the rest of the evening played out. "I'm interested in making sure a little girl gets her mother back," Daniel said. "Everything else is between you and Linda." They reached a platform about 20 feet above the ground floor, surrounded by machinery that provided both cover and potential obstacles. Cole had positioned his meeting location well elevated enough to spot approaching threats, but with multiple escape routes if things went wrong. Two other men emerged from the shadows, both carrying weapons that they didn't bother to conceal. Daniel recognized the type from his construction day-shired muscle, who got paid to look intimidating and weren't particular about the legality of their methods. "Linda, you've caused me a lot of trouble over the past week," Cole said, settling onto a concrete ledge with the casual posture of someone who believed he controlled the situation. "I had customers waiting for merchandise you promised to deliver, and when you disappeared, I had to make excuses that reflected poorly on my reliability." "I never promised you anything," Linda replied. "You assumed I had access to David's files, but I told you repeatedly that I didn't know where he kept his work documents." Cole smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Linda, we both know that's not true. Your husband was building a case against corruption in his unit, and he would have shared that information with his wife. The question is whether you're going to cooperate voluntarily or whether I need to provide additional motivation." Daniel felt Emma's courage stone in his pocket and thought about the promise he'd made to bring Linda home safely. The conversation was moving in a direction that suggested Cole wasn't planning to honor any agreements they might reach. "What kind of additional motivation?" Daniel asked, his hand moving casually toward the impact driver on his belt. "The kind that involves a certain 7-year-old girl whose current address I've already confirmed," Cole said. "Emma's staying with you and your daughter, Mr. Reyes. 1247 Birch Street, apartment 2B. If Linda doesn't cooperate fully, I might need to expand our negotiations to include all the people who've been helping her." The threat against Sophia and Emma made Daniel's vision narrow with rage, but his construction training had taught him to stay calm under pressure and think systematically about problems that required immediate solutions. "Marcus," Linda said quickly, apparently sensing the shift in Daniel's demeanor. "I brought the documents you wanted. David's investigation files, everything he compiled about the corruption in his unit. It's all here." She held up the briefcase, and Cole's attention shifted back to her. "Open it." Linda uncuffed the briefcase from her wrist and opened it on a nearby platform. Even in the dim light, Daniel could see Cole's eyes widen as he examined the contents: photographs, reports, witness statements, and financial records that documented systematic criminal activity within a military police unit deployed to Afghanistan. "This is good," Cole said, his voice taking on the tone of someone examining valuable merchandise. "This is very good. My clients will be extremely interested in these names and dates." Daniel realized that they had reached the moment of truth. If Detective Martinez and her team were going to move in, it would happen now, while Cole was distracted by the documents and his associates were focused on the briefcase rather than watching for threats. But as Cole continued examining the files, Daniel noticed something that made his stomach drop. The man's expressions were too casual, too confident, as if he knew something that Linda and Daniel didn't. "There's just one problem," Cole said, closing the briefcase and standing up. "These are photocopies. Very good photocopies, but copies nonetheless. My clients don't pay premium prices for reproductions, Linda. They want originals." The trap they'd set had just been turned against them, and Daniel realized that Marcus Cole was much smarter than they'd given him credit for. Worse, if Cole suspected this was a setup, Linda's safety and their own were now in immediate jeopardy. Daniel's hand closed around the grip of his impact driver, and he prepared for the conversation to turn violent. Emma's courage stone felt warm against Daniel's palm as he pulled it from his pocket, holding it like a talisman, while Marcus Cole's associates moved to block the exits from the platform. The smooth river rock that a 7-year-old girl had given him for luck now seemed like the only solid thing in a world that was spinning rapidly out of control. "Marcus, the documents are authentic," Linda said, her voice steady despite the weapons now pointed in their direction. "The information is exactly what your clients want, regardless of whether they're originals or copies." Cole laughed, a sound that echoed metallically off the concrete walls of the grain elevator. "Linda, you're missing the point. This isn't just about information anymore. This is about respect, about the consequences of making people wait for something they've already paid for." Daniel felt his construction instincts kicking in, analyzing the platform they stood on as both a trap and a potential defensive position. The metal railings could provide cover, the machinery offered hiding spots, and the multiple levels of catwalks created opportunities for movement if they could break free from Cole's immediate control. "What do you want?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the authority he'd once used to manage construction crews under pressure. "I want Linda to stop playing games and tell me where the original documents are hidden. I want compensation for the week of trouble she's caused me. And I want assurance that none of you will be sharing information about tonight's meeting with law enforcement." Cole's words confirmed Daniel's worst fear. This had never been intended as a simple trade. Cole planned to take the documents, eliminate the witnesses, and disappear before Detective Martinez's team could respond to the trap they'd walked into. "The originals are in a safe deposit box," Linda said quickly. "I can get them for you tomorrow morning when the bank opens." "Linda, we both know that's not true. Your husband was paranoid about banks and government institutions. He would have hidden those documents somewhere more personal, somewhere he could access them without leaving a paper trail." Daniel realized that Cole knew far more about David Patterson's habits and psychology than they'd anticipated. This wasn't a desperate criminal fishing for information. This was someone who'd been planning Linda's capture for weeks, maybe months. "How long have you been watching Emma's family?" Daniel asked. Cole's smile was cold, but satisfied. Long enough to know that David Patterson never trusted official channels with sensitive information. Long enough to know that Linda has been lying about her access to his files. And long enough to know that a certain construction worker has been playing detective instead of minding his own business. The last comment made Daniel's blood run cold. If Cole had been surveilling them for an extended period, he would know about Sophia's involvement, about Emma's location, about all the people who'd helped with their investigation. "Marcus, let's make a deal," Daniel said, shifting his weight slightly to test the stability of the platform they stood on. "You take the photocopies and walk away. Linda and Emma disappear from your life permanently. Everyone goes home safe tonight." "That's not how this works," Cole replied. "I have customers who paid for specific merchandise, and I have a reputation to maintain. Linda is going to tell me where the originals are hidden, or people she cares about are going to start getting hurt." Cole nodded to one of his associates, who pulled out a cell phone and showed them a photograph on the screen. Daniel's heart stopped as he recognized Sophia's apartment building, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been positioned across the street with a telephoto lens. "Your daughter has excellent security habits," Cole said conversationally. "Dead bolts, security chain, even a door bar. But apartment buildings have so many potential access points for people who know what they're looking for." The threat against Sophia made something primitive and dangerous awaken in Daniel's chest. He'd failed to protect his family once before, had let alcohol and weakness cost him his marriage and his daughter's respect. But he could not let his failures put Sophia in danger again. Emma's courage stone seemed to pulse with warmth in his palm, reminding him of the promise he'd made to a frightened child who believed he could fix anything that was broken. Sometimes fixing things required more than patience and careful planning. Sometimes it required the kind of decisive action that construction foremen used when buildings were in danger of collapse. "Linda," Daniel said quietly, "when I move, you run for the stairs on the north side of the platform. Don't look back, don't try to help, just run until you reach the main entrance where the police are waiting. Mr. Reyes, don't." Daniel threw Emma's courage stone as hard as he could at the overhead light that illuminated their platform. The bulb exploded in a shower of glass and sparks, plunging their section of the grain elevator into darkness. In the same motion, he pulled his impact driver from his belt and dove toward Cole's position. The construction tool wasn't designed as a weapon, but 25 years of using it had made the impact driver an extension of Daniel's arm. The motorized chuck struck Cole in the solar plexus with enough force to double him over, and the momentum carried both men toward the metal railing that surrounded the platform. Gunshots exploded in the confined space, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning as Cole's associates fired blindly into the darkness. Daniel heard Linda's footsteps on the metal stairs, running toward safety, and felt a savage satisfaction that at least part of their plan was working. Cole struggled beneath him, trying to reach for a weapon while gasping for air. Daniel grabbed the man's wrist and slammed it repeatedly against the concrete platform until the gun Cole had been reaching for clattered away into the shadows. "Where are the rest of your people?" Daniel demanded, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. "Go to hell," Cole wheezed. Daniel heard Detective Martinez's voice over his earpiece. "We heard gunshots. Moving in now. Reyes, get yourself and Linda to the main entrance immediately." "Linda's already moving," Daniel replied, struggling to maintain his grip on Cole while the other gunman tried to find them in the darkness. "But I'm not leaving until I know Sophia and Emma are safe." A construction site had taught Daniel to work by feel when visibility was limited, to navigate by touch and sound when visual cues weren't available. The grain elevator's metal framework transmitted vibrations from footsteps and movement, allowing him to track the positions of Cole's associates even in the darkness. Someone was moving along the catwalk to his left, trying to flank his position. Daniel rolled sideways, pulling Cole with him as a human shield, just as another volley of gunshots rang out. The bullets sparked off metal railings where he'd been positioned seconds earlier. His reciprocating saw was still attached to his belt, and Daniel pulled it free with his left hand while maintaining his grip on Cole with his right. The saw's motor roared to life, its serrated blade designed to cut through metal and wood. In the confined space of the grain elevator, the sound was terrifying, the scream of a machine that could dismember anyone who came too close. "That's far enough," Daniel called out to the invisible gunman. "Next person who fires a shot gets introduced to 15 amps of cutting power." The shooting stopped, replaced by the sound of running footsteps, as Cole's associates apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Daniel heard car doors slamming outside the grain elevator, engines starting, and the screech of tires on gravel as vehicles fled the scene. Police flashlights began cutting through the darkness as Detective Martinez's team reached the platform. Daniel released his grip on Marcus Cole and stood up slowly, his hands visible and his weapons returned to his belt. "Cole's unconscious but breathing," he reported. Linda made it to the main entrance. His associates fled in vehicles heading east. Martinez appeared at the top of the stairs, her weapon drawn but pointed safely away from Daniel. "Reyes, are you injured?" Daniel took inventory of his body, surprised to discover that despite the violence of the past few minutes, he seemed to be unharmed. His hands were shaking with adrenaline, and his heart was pounding against his ribs, but he was alive and functional. "I'm okay," he said. "Detective, Cole threatened my daughter and Emma. He has surveillance photos of Sophia's apartment. We need to get protection to them immediately." "Already on it," Martinez replied. "I sent units to your daughter's address as soon as we heard the gunshots. They'll stay until we're certain there are no other threats." As Cole was handcuffed and read his rights, Daniel felt Emma's courage stone in his pocket somehow, still there despite the chaos of the past few minutes. The smooth river rock seemed to carry the weight of all the promises he'd made and kept, all the trust that had been placed in him by people who believed he could protect what mattered most. Linda appeared at the top of the stairs, escorted by 2 police officers but apparently unharmed. Her face was pale with shock, but her eyes were bright, with the realization that her ordeal was finally over. "Mr. Reyes, is it really finished?" she asked. "Can Emma and I go home now?" Daniel looked at Marcus Cole being led away in handcuffs, thought about the evidence they'd gathered and the testimony Linda could provide, and realized that sometimes the simplest answers were the most profound. "It's finished," he said. "You can go home to your daughter." The new family photo sat on Daniel's kitchen table beside Emma's original torn photograph, both images telling the story of how broken things could be repaired when the right people cared enough to try. In the new picture, taken 6 months after that night at the grain elevator, Daniel stood beside Linda and Emma in the backyard of their rebuilt life, with Sophia laughing in the background as she pushed Emma on a tire swing that hung from the same oak tree where Daniel had once promised to build a treehouse. It was a Sunday morning in February, and Emma was getting ready for her first sleepover at a friend's house, a milestone that represented how far she'd come in trusting that the world contained more good people than dangerous ones. She sat at Daniel's table, carefully packing her overnight bag, while he made pancakes and coffee for the adults who'd become her extended family. "Mr. Daniel, do you think my new friend Jenny will like the bracelet I made for her?" Emma asked, holding up a creation of colorful beads and elastic string that had occupied most of her previous evening. "I think Jenny's going to love it," Daniel replied, flipping pancakes with the easy confidence of someone who'd had months to practice domestic routines he'd never mastered during his first attempt at family life. "It's beautiful, and it was made by someone who cares about her. That makes it extra special." Linda entered the kitchen carrying a load of Emma's clean laundry, her face bright with the kind of contentment that came from knowing her daughter was safe, happy, and surrounded by people who would protect her. The therapy sessions had helped both of them process the trauma of Marcus Cole's threats and the weeks of uncertainty, but it was the daily routine of normal family life that had done the most to heal the wounds left by their ordeal. Good morning, everyone, Linda said, kissing the top of Emma's head before accepting the cup of coffee Daniel offered her. Emma, did you remember to pack your toothbrush? Yes, Mommy, and my pajamas and my courage stone, and the book about the girl who talks to dragons. Emma's courage stone had been returned to her the night after the confrontation at the grain elevator, but she'd insisted that Daniel keep it whenever she thought he might need extra bravery. It had traveled back and forth between them dozens of times over the past 6 months, a tangible reminder of the bond they'd forged during the darkest week of both their lives. Sophia arrived as they were finishing breakfast, letting herself in with the key Daniel had given her after they'd officially reconciled. She carried grocery bags and wore the paint-stained clothes that had become her weekend uniform since she'd started the art therapy program she'd designed specifically for children who'd experienced trauma. "Sorry I'm late," she said, distributing hugs to Emma and Linda before kissing Daniel's cheek with the casual affection of a daughter who'd learned to love her father again. "I stopped by the store to get supplies for next week's class. Emma, are you excited about your sleepover?" "Very excited," Emma replied, "but also a little nervous because I've never stayed overnight at someone else's house before." "That's normal," Sophia said, settling into the chair beside Emma's. "The first time I had a sleepover, I was so nervous I almost called my dad to come pick me up. But it ended up being one of the best nights of my childhood." Daniel listened to the conversation with the deep satisfaction of someone who'd learned that some kinds of happiness were worth the risk of everything that could go wrong. Emma's recovery had been remarkably aided by professional counseling, but anchored by the knowledge that she was surrounded by adults who would never abandon her when she needed them most. Linda had also flourished in the months since Marcus Cole's arrest. The military corruption case that David's documents had exposed had led to multiple convictions and a significant financial settlement that ensured Emma's college education and Linda's financial security. More importantly, Linda had rediscovered the confidence and strength that had been eroded by years of looking over her shoulder. "Daniel, I got a call from Detective Martinez yesterday," Linda said as Emma went to brush her teeth before leaving for her sleepover. "The last of Cole's associates was sentenced. 5 to 10 years, which means they'll all be in prison long enough for Emma to grow up and move on with her life." "That's wonderful news," Daniel replied, though he'd long since stopped worrying about Marcus Cole and his organization. The real victory hadn't been seeing criminals punished, it had been watching Emma learn to laugh again, seeing Linda build a career as a victim's advocate, witnessing Sophia transform her own trauma into art that helped other children heal. After Emma left for her sleepover, bubbling with excitement and clutching her homemade bracelet, Daniel and Sophia sat on his back porch, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood come alive with Sunday morning activity. Mrs. Chen was tending her garden with the focused intensity of someone who understood that growing things required patience and daily attention. The Hendersons were washing their car while their toddler helped by splashing water on everything within reach. "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," Sophia said, her tone serious enough to make Daniel set down his coffee cup. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about the treehouse you promised to build me when I was 8. The one we planned but never got around to making." Daniel felt his chest tighten with the familiar ache of regret. "Sophia, I'm sorry about that. I know how disappointed you were when—" "That's not what I meant," Sophia interrupted gently. "I was thinking that maybe it's time we built it, not for 8-year-old me, but for Emma, and maybe for any other kids who might need a safe place to go when the world feels too big and scary." The idea caught Daniel completely off guard. "You want to build a treehouse?" "I want to build the treehouse we always planned, in the oak tree, in Linda and Emma's backyard. Emma mentioned that she'd love to have a place where she could go to think about her daddy and feel close to him. I thought we could make it a memorial project, something that honors David's memory, while giving Emma a special place that's just hers." Daniel looked at his daughter, seeing not just the forgiveness she'd extended to him, but the wisdom she'd gained from watching how people could choose to help each other instead of turning away when help was needed. "That's a beautiful idea," he said. "But you know, I'm not getting any younger. My construction days are mostly behind me." Sophia smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the little girl who'd once believed her father could build anything she could imagine. "I didn't say you had to do all the work yourself. Emma wants to help, and Linda said she'd contribute materials and labor. Mrs. Chen mentioned that she knows how to install electrical wiring. Miguel said he'd handle any welding we might need." Daniel realized that his daughter was proposing more than just a construction project. She was suggesting a community effort that would give everyone who'd helped during Emma's crisis a chance to contribute to something positive and lasting. "It would be like raising a barn," he said slowly, "except we'd be raising hope instead." "Exactly. Dad, you spent so many years thinking about the things you'd broken, the promises you'd failed to keep. Maybe it's time to focus on the things you can still build, the promises you can still make and keep." That afternoon, Daniel walked through Riverside Park, where he'd first met Emma 6 months earlier. The playground looked the same, weathered equipment and old oak trees that had witnessed countless childhood dramas and triumphs. But Daniel saw it differently now, understood it as a place where lives could change direction in the space of a whispered plea for help. He sat on the same bench where he'd spent so many Tuesday evenings contemplating his failures and limitations. This time, instead of dwelling on regret, he found himself planning the treehouse project Sophia had proposed. The oak tree in Linda's backyard was perfect for construction-strong branches, good elevation, plenty of room for a platform and walls that could provide both privacy and safety. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Having fun at sleepover but missing everyone. Can't wait to hear about treehouse plans tomorrow." Daniel smiled, realizing that Emma's ability to be excited about the future while still cherishing the relationships she'd built was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of her recovery. She'd learned that loving new people didn't require forgetting old ones, that trust could be rebuilt even after it had been broken, that families could expand to include anyone who was willing to show up when showing up mattered. As evening approached, Daniel found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a man who'd learned to expect nothing from life except the opportunity to quietly fix other people's broken things. Tonight, he was someone's trusted friend, someone's reliable father, someone's partner in building something that would outlast all of them. Emma's torn family photograph was still tucked in his wallet, but now it shared space with newer picturesque images of birthday parties and school plays, grocery store trips and lazy Sunday mornings, all the ordinary moments that proved extraordinary when they were shared by people who'd chosen to love each other despite the risks involved. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a second chance, Daniel thought as he walked home through the gathering darkness. But sometimes second chances don't come as dramatic redemption stories. Sometimes they come as quiet opportunities to show up, to be reliable, to prove that trust isn't misplaced when it's given to people who understand how precious it is. Tomorrow, he would start building a treehouse for a little girl who taught him that courage was often as simple as refusing to give up hope. Next week, he would help that same little girl practice riding her bicycle without training wheels. Next month, he would attend her school play where she'd been cast as a brave princess who rescued herself and everyone she loved. These were the promises he could keep, the family he could protect, the future he could build one careful day at a time. And if that wasn't redemption, it was something even better. It was proof that broken things could be repaired, that lost people could be found, and that love could grow in the spaces between what was lost and what was possible. The courage stone in his pocket felt warm against his fingers as Daniel walked home to the family that had chosen him, just as surely as he'd chosen them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of their trust. But tonight, for the first time in years, he was exactly where he belonged.